kawe. Ngā huatanga I roto ki tātou maito wairo, he ke atu ki roto ki tamatia. Nō reira ngā mihi nui. Hoi e no au ki koutou te kauni hera, a me ma kauni hera, a me tō tātou rōpū huki. Māori, mo te kauni hera arohe a te matau Māori kānui huki te me. Me ngā kai mahi roto ki tō tātou kauni hera, me tō tātou hoa e koe Rick, wai te kite nei koe te rā nei, a hakoa kei te noho, e te noho I te taha tonu koe ngā mahi tōranga pū, wai hau mā rātou hei kaue, me kawai ka pipi nei ngā tūranga e whakaheiringi o ki tō tātou motu whānui, o Aotearoa, a mō ngā tau e toru e tū mai nei. Nō reira ngā mihi anō hui koutou a ki tātou. Hoi e nō tukanātu ki ngā mihi ki ngā tini aitu piri, te tuatai o tō tātou karakia. Puta nō mai I te wairo, tai nō mai ki roto ki. Tō tātou whānau kei ngāti kere, ngāti pihere anō hui kei reira anō ki tētahi e takato ana. I ngā nahi rai tukanātu ki tētahi anō ki. Te whānau McDonald's, tēnei wā, te whānau te tau tō tātou rangatira o pua paura kai kone o te shāsha whānau hoki te. Nō reira haere tunu koutou. Haere tunu koutou, takahi mai tunu koutou te ara whānui o tāne. O te rāki tai tunu koe ki te tarona tapu I hoa. Mana tau koutou katoa ngā mate hei manaki hei tiaki moake Hawke tunu atu. Me ino hoki tatu. E te māngai mi ngāna hera pone te toka tūru tapu. E tatu mai nei koutou I wainu tēnei whakamoimiti o mātou. E tari anō hoki ngā kupu e whakapua ki nei mātou e roto ki tō koutou kruhiatanga. O koutou tēnei hoki te tīmatanga me te whakaotinga. Mai o mātou e tūmanaku tēnei roki koutou tō tātou roimat. O koe anō ki te māngai hei tau te kau mai. Ai e nei, ake nei hai. E te māngai mi ngāna hera pone te toka tūru tapu. Whakaungia mai nei mātou ki roto ki te aroha noa. Whakaorangia mai hoki tō tātou poari, tō tātou iwi kumiti tēnei rā. Ki haere pai ka toki ngā kaupapa, a ko takata mai hoki rātu ki mua tō mātou aroara. O te rā ke mohiu nei hoki a nei rā hoki, ngā kupu, ngā kōrero e pāna hoki a tātou. Ke rongo taringa mai ki ngā kauni hera, te kauni hera nei, a kei kone hoki tātou tō tātou poari Māori. Nō reira manaki tia mai nō ki rātu kei rutu ki ngā hohi pera me ngā marae kāinga nō māhui wihana. Ke piki te ora, piki te kā me te māramatanga ki rungu ki tēnā, me tēnā rātou. Te māngai mi ngāne hera pone te toka tūru tapu. Whakaungia mai nei mātou ki rutu ki te arohanua. Pai here tētenu mātou. Ki rutu ki te rangi Māori ngā wākatoa. Ka koe no ki te māngai hei tau tuko mai. Ai e nei, ake nei, ai. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, papa. Pāku e mihi kia koe rā anko. Nā unei tuku tēnā te mihi ki o tātou nei mate. Me ki rā ta maha. Mai te aho te Maori, te kā Maui, tauhi rā ki paritu, kei ngā mate kei rungi a tātou katoa. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi kia koe. Me ki rā te mihi hoki. Te whakatau mai tēnā nā ka karekia mō tātou I te atiata nei. Nā unei whakarite a tātou, nō reira, tēnei te mihi atu. Kai mura ki tēnei ngā waiata o tātou. Ko tāku tumanako kia tū tātou katoa mō tēnei o ngā waiata. Nā hene we. Nā I te kai o tātou.
Take that.
Take that, yeah. Ko te ki mai o te mokopuna nei. I te wā I waiata tātou tēnei waiata. Me āta kamo nei rā I o koutou kamo. Kia tai ai ki te haerenga kairunga I ngā kupu. Ki runga I te waiata nei. A journey. She says, I te wā I waiata koutou I tēnei waiata. Go on the journey. Mō wai, mō tō tātou nei tamariki mokapuna, rangatahi, kai te haramai. Anei rā tātou tēnei, te taiao, kia hoki whakahoki mai rā te Māori o te taiao. Mō wai, mō rātou e whaia tēnei i amata. Koe no tēnā tātou, e tū tātou.
E ara I whanatu ai rā, pura I tū mai nei, e piki ki runga rā, ki a marama ahau, kei raro ko te matau, te whakatikanga ake ki runga rā, ka titi whatere hutai, te ara I whanatu ai rā, ko te kura ki ahau, hei tohu no ake, ki te kura I te rehutai, te whakawhiti o te rā, te whakaai o whenua, hoki muri mai au I te iwi, te ara I whanatu ai rā.
Ai, te pito mata ki te pito mara, te pito ora ki te pito ora, tēnei tātou ka mihi, tēnā koutou katoa.
Excuse me.
Kia ora tātou, kia ora matua hame mō tō whakamoimati, me tō mihi, and ngā mihi tui rena wihi, no whakaki, mō tō waiata. Kia ora koutou, te komiti Māori o te Taiwhenua, o te kainihiro o te mātaua Maori. Te mata. So welcome everyone, and off we go. We've got a long agenda, so haere tonu. So first one, notices. So I think we've got a few. Dr. Maka and Api are needing to leave at 12 midday for various reasons, and Rose is also leaving at 1 p.m. for Taiwhenua meeting, and no one else. Waka's getting harder to row, you know, you're not going anywhere. And you have some notices as well?
Yes, just through the chair, which may well ease some of the discussions over the course of the day. I would like to recommend through the chair that we withdraw from the agenda paper 11, which is the Ahuriri Regional Park Joint Working Group. Its associated paper, which is the terms of reference and draft. And because of the associations within item 12, which is the Ahuriri Estuary and Catchment Agency Activity Stocktake, that paper also be withdrawn for a future date.
Rārama, tautoko?
Aye. 11 and 12.
11 and 12, fine. Was there any other notices? No, I think that was it. Also just, Carol, just for me. Okay, to point. And also our condolences to Councillor Williams for the loss kua mati tana mama.
Oh, really?
Ka aroha te whānau Williams. And so we'll go on to apologies. We've got Rex Graham. Any others? Other apologies? Matua Bill, yes. Matua Bill, we had to leave at 7:10, so he didn't turn up, so we had to go. Zach? Beck, Makoi. Anybody else? Everyone here? Is there someone to move the apology?
Happy to move.
Mike, second. Henry, Matua, Harmy. All in favour?
Aye.
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 Carried. Conflict of interest declarations. Saying to the three, I speak. Any conflict of interest declarations? Oh. Okay. And to the next one, confirmation of minutes of the Māori Committee meeting held on 8th of July. Any amendments, additions, deletions, comments? Oh, now, I'm just going to go out of Stella now and go into the other one. Get used to this, eh? Page by page. Page 2, anything on there? No. Page 3. Page 4. Yeah, it's more like page 5. Page 6. Okay. Anything about the additions, deletions, amendments for the meeting on 8th of July? Can I have someone to move?
Yeah.
Ida, second, Henry. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So we're going to, so we don't have any alternate members today? No? Cool. So we're on to confirmation, I'm not done that one. Ripoata, Takiwā. Takiwā, Taiwhenua, representatives updates. Well, we'll go with the first on the list there, Taiwhenua o Heretaunga, Māori.
Oh, kia ora, Madam Chair. I think you could probably take the report, and I just see you here, Kerry, so probably get a little update in terms of the number of submissions, if you've got that, and where things are at. But quite pleased to say that there may be a large number of Heretaunga Marae Hapu that have responded by way of submission. I think it also highlights a couple of things that in the application or the submission process, that forms, the proper form and needs to be filled in, and how you get to communicate that back over to your whānau, because a number of whānau came in as a block, and they have this expectation they may have that single right. So just trying to put that out there to kind of say, these processes are what they are. And but I just want to highlight, I guess, some of the ongoing work, particularly around in our earlier discussion this morning amongst the committee. We've been talking through, I guess, the application and arrival of Te Mana o Te Wai. And while my report focuses on this key bit of work that came as a result of the Ruataniwha water storage, where the Board of Inquiry actually said to the Regional Council, look, you need to commission and resource some work to undertake with tangata whenua, mana whenua, around this whole definition and meaning of Māori. And of course its application when it comes to monitoring Māori, and I guess the approach that Western science has insofar as identifying proxy indicators. And yet we have this holistic view of the world where we look at cultural indicators as part of that measure too as well. And so we've met with Ian. This work has been a work in progress for over 2-3 years, where within particularly Heretaunga, and we did happen to get into Tamatea because of the nature and extent of the awa, tuki at the foothills of Ruahine, and of course all the other contributing tributaries that actually then send all of that water body straight out over here to Haumona, and of course the concerns that were highlighted around the appropriate approach to undertake, particularly as we've got as you would all appreciate, the influence area of marae and hapu straddled right along, right up through to the very foothills, and having the respect of having those conversations. So therefore, just to say quickly that four seasonal wānanga were set up to have conversations with our respective marae up through to the extent of the Ruahine. We've been able to garner and over the period of 3 days facilitate conversations to garner feedback in terms of what that cultural indicator framework would be. And of course, as if you've not had the opportunity to read the report, we give a little insight as to the cultural indicators looking, of course, around the tohu that we'd like to fix into this framework based on species, if not ika, manu, fishing, and of course where the complementary Western science using SMAC kits and all of those then can come in. But, you know, all of that's been undertaken by the council, so there's no use doubling up on that effort. It comes out, of course, in the State of the Environment reports, folks. So the intention, of course, was to straddle the results of this monitoring framework process into a report, which would then sit ultimately along the side of the State of the Environment report. Whilst, as I say, it reflects Western science, this particular process, which has been ground truthed, reflects our whakaaro from marae hapu whānau, etc. And of course, just to note the various frameworks that are around the country, that's fine, but we chose to build our own local framework and model. That's been achieved, it's been great work. And of course, having to do that just means that the work is yet to begin in terms of now having to go out and trial the model. And of course, we've always said right at the very beginning that there's going to be some ironing out insofar as our framework and how we measure these indicators. And of course, if you go down to that really colourful kind of Maori stated method, you usually find in most models kind of 3 indicators. I guess, you know, it's bad, it's somewhere in the middle, and it's good. So here again, trying to extrapolate out the various states from a Maori perspective, we've come up with certainly 6 of them in a heat map, or sorry, a traffic light system, and of course the type of stage and trend that's reflected in that, because it just, you know, is so different in the way that from bad to good, there's so many states, and they can alter throughout a seasonal year. And of course, we like to think when we monitor what is the state of play right now. I guess the difference between that and of course the Western model, it indicates, I guess, it's monitoring trends. Notwithstanding that's what we're doing, but you know how our people are, folks. We'd like to, you know, you see things now, and you know, something needs to happen, and of course you try and fit that into the annual period, in this case of a maramataka. So here again, we've been evolving these sorts of conversations models to reflect this is what our whānau would like to do. We would like to think that once we start our trials, that we're building up a kaitiaki team of people. The ideal would have been to wānanga, as we've found a lot of interest, particularly our rangatahi coming on board, and of course engaging some of the schools at a point where we know the framework's going to be giving us the benefit of good results, data, knowledge, information. So here again, all these things do take a little bit of time. And I think what it does reflect, if you've gone through this report, that there's quite a bit of input, both technology, matauranga, science that goes into this report, and so far as where we think we've got the confidence in knowing that we can roll it out, just get it going. And of course, coming back to Ian, unfortunately COVID has an impact, and I do realise it's on the financial considerations of council overall. And of course, our our contribution from the Taiwhenua by putting our own skin in the game, of course, is also relevant to our part to it all, but of course notwithstanding it doesn't remove the obligation, of course, of this particular council. I think we've got to look at innovative ways in order to derive, particularly when we've got climate change impacting on us, to get the best of information, quality data, so that we can make better informed decisions. And I guess that's what I think this committee, this council is always faced with, the effective decisions based on good quality of information. We have the ability to actually say, look, it's taken a wee while to actually drive this in a parallel way. And in my mind, I think that the touch point's got to be agreement when we start to get to the point of where Western science is actually supporting mātauranga Māori and vice versa. So I'll just leave that for the time being if there are any questions. Kaere? Okay, haere tonu.
Just through the chair. He mihi kia koutou o te Taiwhenua. E noho tahina i kia Ian Maxwell me tōna rōtu. Ki te mahia kia whakahua mai tēnei e koro e koe. Tēnei te mihi atu.
Kia ora, Pieri. It's my report.
And also note to confirm Gerald Brown as
Oh,
the
yeah.
Takiwā.
Oh, ka aro atu. Yes. I felt that was right at the very top. So, yes, we've had that discussion. I was rather expecting Joanna to be here today so that she can become familiar with the process and the role, which she's not too disfamiliar with. Yeah, welcome her on board. And, of course, with the Heretaunga Tamatea Settlement Trust. Sorry for that little blip, and I did put down Heretaunga Tamatea, but didn't finish it off, but Heretaunga Tamatea Settlement Trust.
Ka taia tinana, and then we can appropriately welcome.
Well, pai.
Kia ora. Next report is myself. County Executive, take it as read. Don't think there's anything. We've been busy planting. The Marae Renovation Fund, as that was the 18 were the first two tranches of application, and we're just waiting on the last tranche that'll make 24 marae. Already started on the project back home. The Wairoa Commissioning Agency, there are only 4 pilots in Aotearoa, and Wairoa was one of them, and I was very pleased that 2/3 of the feedback was around the tile, most especially our awa. So I was smiling from ear to ear when I heard the feedback. So you know, that's something that's going to have impact for our people, our environment, and our the well-being of our whānau back home. Great opportunity through whānau order and mihi to the whare Māori o Takiwā and Mara Andrews, who was the consultant. The other, I suppose, the one thing I haven't included in here is some of those trees that you can see that they've come here to Hawke Park, and I believe they're being planted today, is it, Rick? So Rick came through the other weekend and picked the last two, 200, 150, 200.
200, 250.
We jammed them on the back of your truck.
Jammed them on the back of the truck, just full. Yeah.
And kahikatea and Demu and Toto.
Lovely.
So that was our
Awesome.
koha to the park. And, you know, kia ora for that. And that's just a relief because for me, Katarina, we were planting the last, I don't know, 300 years sort back over the weekend too. So they're all in the ground as of today. So Kate Deploy, that's the end of the 5,000. And just that comment on the pollution hotline with the AFCO issue. So the whānau and especially in town community straight across, so there was sometimes they get ammonia leaks, so sort of want to get to the bottom of that, whatever that was. And that's pretty much mine, and I'll just hand over to Katarina.
Huge apologies to Pieri and to Annalie for my late report. I've got it here right now and I've CC'd it to you. Basically I'm covering mainly all the planting around Te Rauhina Marae, Okaka Urupa, and liaising with tangata whenua. Also planting at Waiherere Regional Park, also known as Takiwā Marae, some 2 hectares that were cleared through the cultural impact assessment on the awa. And then followed up with the last site that was completed was a place called Whakapau. The Whakapau is an old Urupa site or designated site. It's also significant to when the Takiwā Waka made a turn on that corner, and also to bury the load that was on the waka as well. So that's why that was one of the 5 priority sites in Wairoa that was that our engineers, he's now left now, David Caruth, we named Rawiri, and Graham Edmondson. They were both the engineers that saw that mahi through. My role was really to liaise with the tangata whenua and find out the cultural values and significance of the area, and to find some solutions. I can't say it was an easy project, mainly because of the structure of maybe the land owners and the marae trustees and committees, and being available during this whole space of a year and a half. During COVID, it was just a no-no to go to any of those sites. Even when the restrictions were relaxed, there was still resistance to meet. So I ran the Māori compass over the sites, all of them, all 5, and I negotiated that the tangata whenua rolled the Māori compass out. So it's been endorsed by the tangata whenua. One of the oldest ones is Karaitiana King. He's been really valuable, alongside with Richard Nenia, Tamini Smith, and many of the marae committees and trustees. The last thing I wanted to say is the tool I've been using, the Māori compass.
Put something up.
I did put a presentation together, but I just
Put it up now.
wanted to line it up with Te Mana o Te Wai, because Te Mana o Te Wai is like, whoa, and the Māori compass, or any actual monitoring compass, is like Rangi and Papa coming together. You know, if the first objective in Te Mana o Te Wai is to the wai itself, and the whole concept of the Māori compass was first strengthen the realm of Tāne, strengthen the realm of Tangaroa. Only then will the people, or the tangata whenua, will survive. So that's that first cover page. That's what the Māori compass looks like. The red is the actual Māori. I can't flick that forward. If somebody can move that forward.
The next slide, please.
Just follow down with your finger.
So tangata whenua, have a look at that. Oh, excuse me, matua Mike. So back to that again. So just briefly at 12 o'clock, so just look at that as a clock, it's a compass. At 12 o'clock is the tangata whenua. So I would go and engage with the tangata whenua, meet hui, pōwhiri. So all our engineers, they were pōwhiri'd onto Te Rauhina every marae, every time. Whakatau, and then we'd go to the site. Not only that, they were able to learn what spiritual connection we'd have to the water. The tangata whenua were able to share stories and pūrākau around the mahinga kai and what kind of kai and species are in the wai. Also be able to talk about their cultural practices that they still that they're prevalent today. Look at the habitat to see that it's really well degraded, and yes, let's put 600 plants in there. the biodiversity. So everything's holistic. The fish health we didn't really look at, but in that particular one, that's just a theoretical one. I went up to the Waio and I've studied the fish and the abundance, taken the otoliths out and had some cultural mapping. So each one of those attributes, 12 of them, is a kete of knowledge. It's like a wānanga, each one's a wānanga, so it does take time to be with the people. And the people have the last say in endorsing it as well. So I've gone back around to have it endorsed. So move on to the next one, please, Matua. This will be really quick. So,
I don't know about that.
okay.
Very quick.
So what is it? It's our navigational tool, basically. It's what it does, it measures the mauri of a awa, a stream, a puna, a roto, and like I says before, the middle mauri is the glue that glues the people to the water, to the whenua.
So just the point there, so it measures the Maori order. Hey, because there's different types of Maori.
Yes, yes. So we look at the classes of water. So that's part of the framework is to sit down and talk with the tangata whenua about their pardon me?
Oh, I was just saying their own whakaaro.
Yeah, their own whakaaro, absolutely. I don't go with my own. I draw it out of the tangata whenua. The next slide is looking at the scale from 1 to 5, a bit like your traffic lights that Maru was talking about. Same with us, as greens go, anything from 80 to 100%. So like for Māori, we're not using the smart kit as well. We'll leave that to other people. We would actually jump in the water and swim with the fish, taste it, see it. If you can't see your feet, 100 and it's a metre long, well, yeah, it's no good to be in the water. We'll look at the next one. So that's our scale. How does it work? It starts with the conversation. So this tool is our conversation tool. Typical questions would be, how easy is it to catch a tuna or a fish in your river, and how natural is the habitat? So that's how the conversation starts with either the landowner or the tangata whenua. And the next one there, Matua. And then and then we get them to fill this little template in. This template is filled in by the tangata whenua, the landowner, and they will tell me if they're the owner, how long they've been there, if they've been there mai rano, and so you fill that in. And the next one, yes, is your score. So you score it, and the blue is your mauri, and the red is what's diminished. So what you see there is the red can also be your restoration plan. How do you bring that mahinga kai back? How do you bring that habitat back? So that's about planning 3 or 5 years worth of planting. The biodiversity is so low, so let's introduce or bring back some of the old ones or get rid of the pests. And down below is looking at the attributes and looking at the score and where is the site. Like, for example, that site there is Ngāmotu. Next page, please. And last of all, we're looking at from the policy to the tool. So we're looking at Te Mana o Te Wai and how that marries with tangata whenua rolling out the Māori compass or a Māori barometer of some sort. And the last one is that this compass is not new. It's been endorsed by the GDC and the East Coast whānau, Tūranga and Mahaki. In the last, since 2017 to present day, it's been applied to the Wairau wastewater discharge consent and we'll be seeing a hearing pretty soon. Also been supported by the Matangiro Reserves Board and Tātou during the pre-hearing of the wastewater discharge. It's been applied to this cultural impact assessment on the Wairau River. Was developed in 2014 in Gisborne, Tūranga, rolled out in Wairau on the same year that December, and it's been rolled out in various different sites along the Waio and the Wairau River, as well as been incorporated into the Wairau Taiwhenua Taiao strategy. I'd like to move that my report be received. Any questions? Hopefully not.
Any questions? I suppose we've had presentations for two Māori monitoring tools. So the question I suppose is how do you measure the Māori? Hawkesbury Regional Council. So you've got, we've got the report that was given the other day with all the state of the environment, pages and pages of Western science. So now putting to Te Mana or Te Wai, the first hierarchy or objective obligation is about the Māori of our water. So therefore, our tono to you, Regional Council, is how do you measure the Māori? And you've just been given two examples that are in practice, and so therefore there needs to be that work with our people, with tangata whenua, with mana whenua, and whether it's your tool or Katarina's tool, whatever tai whenua adopts, whatever tool, you need to engage.
And I think it's a
There's
bit
need to
wider than, there's the measure, but there's also the framework and implementation, which is a key factor in the whole process, because it's about having the measure, but then how's that incorporated into the day-to-day running from an operational perspective when staff go and do monitoring in the awa, how's that been implemented? So yeah, there are two questions I would say. I had to support your
as well, in addition, So I suppose might be something I want to ask.
So room for wānanga, plenty of room for wānanga.
So we just had it presented, our State of the Environment report, and it's done 5 yearly. But there are conversations going on that are probably 5 yearly is too far apart. So we'll look at it being possibly every 3 years, sorry. And I suppose my partai is how should we be incorporating the Māori compass within that 3 yearly monitoring? Because I don't feel it's appropriate that our staff go and do any of the monitoring, because we leave it to mana whenua to shape that however they want to. But how do we resource and marry that into the state of the environment almost as its own chapters, but led by the mana whenua? Is that the direction we're heading?
Yes, if I may. Oh, absolutely. As I've just tried to describe, state of the environment, very focused Western science. We recognise, and there's an obligation by council actually to support, and you've heard the frameworks, and I guess the ground truthing and involvement, engagement, and of course investment of both time, energy, voluntary stuff, which then gets to run alongside and complement that state of environment report. So, and part of our discussion on the agenda, Madam Chair, was to look at the annual and long-term plan discussion and workshop around where these particular things need to be supported. So I would be grateful or be chuffed if I knew that. Yeah, look, these sorts of processes that are going on, they do need support. I did say that I do recognise there's a real tight, because of the post-COVID, and of course, rates haven't been increased that much, that you've only got limit in the pool. In fact, this month, what we've got to look at here is where do you start to look for any other supporting funds to support this effort. And it just so happens this month you've got the Te Mana o Te Wai. There's about 3 or 4 of them that are going on. I've been in the space where you put these things in, you get turned down, you put a lot of time into it, and I thought whether or not there could have been a part that our Māori team could have played in terms of that time to support, whether or not it's a joint application, so forth. And of course allow, I guess, which the council have probably observed, that there's been a kind of interdependence to enable, in our regard, for us to just go ahead and do what we need to do without being influenced by Western science. And pleasing to say, hand on heart, we've come out with our own kind of emerged ground truth one, but as I say, it does need a contribution and support. And I like the idea about how the period now needs to be brought down from 5 years. With climate change coming on more frequently, and these kind of big things now being more often, I think that there needs to be a concerted effort in that we keep a very good eye on what's going on. We all know what's going on with thing within our waterways and everything else in the state of the environment. So, yeah, kia ora, I think that it does need to be supported in some way, shape or form. That's where that discussion was going to go on a later item of our agenda.
And I think to add to that, in the Te Manawatū document, there's a section in there that says, when we talked about this morning, about the annual plans, the long-term plans, obviously they need to be accommodated to look through that document. So, yep, those long-term plans have been set and they've been done, but obviously with the recommendations in the report, that would encompass some of that in the framework. So I suppose if when we talk about Te Manawatū and implementing some of that policy and framework and structure within the council, then if we take note of that document, it's saying, hey, the long-term plan may need to be changed to accompany what we're having the kōrero around.
Yep. Cool.
Any other comment? Oh, sorry? Rick.
I'd just like to add a point, I think, to re-emphasise what Henny White said. I think the 5-year term is rather odd. I would have thought, thinking about it now, because it just occurred to me that a 3-year term is much better, and it should occur, the report should occur, drop in the year before the triennial elections. So it then sets a platform for the new incoming council to see this is the status of it, and when the new council comes in, this is what you've got to look at. I just want to say thank you very much for your Maori compass. I thought it was really, really informative, and I think it adds an enormous amount of value. I started these things from a really deep philosophical point of view. I realise people say that they have these laws of nature and they understand nature. Well, we don't actually. All knowledge is human knowledge. It's not nature's knowledge, it's human knowledge. It doesn't exist outside of us, it exists inside our heads. And every tool we've got to understand and better appreciate what nature's doing is helpful. I don't think any tool is any better than the other. All tools are important. And so it's just our way of looking at nature around us to understand in our own minds what's going on. Not what's in nature's mind. Nature's got a mind which is completely beyond our ability to conceive. So every tool is helpful. Thank you.
Any other comment? Thank you, Katarina. Next on to Whanganui Rotu, Peter.
Kia ora koutou. I'll go through, and then my other members may want to come in as we go through. And we just bullet pointed our report, but and I'll just go through briefly and just to acknowledge our reports from Heretaunga and Wairua. Awesome. As we embark on that hikoe and that journey with the awa, we mentioned this morning about the foreshore and seabed, and how big this discussion's going to be in relation to the why. It's very important, so a lot of kōrero is going to come up in relation as we hikoe on that journey. Just briefly with the Te Whanganui Rotu, we're just we've completed a draft MOU with Napier City Council, and then hopefully over the next month we can get that signed off, and that's just building our partnership and relationship with the Napier City Council, because obviously we've got a partnership with the HBRC, or Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Now we're looking at how do we add value, and then we work collectively across both councils to obviously make effective and efficient changes for Māori within our ahuriri area. So that's, once that document's finished, obviously we'll be able to provide that to council, and there may be some shared, obviously, with just doing our Māori charter, and I think there's some similarities between the two charters we're going to be working through. And that was a point too, just thanks to Api and Robin, we've gone through our draft charter changes in that in regards to HBRC, and we'll be discussing that later on. But yeah, no, it's been an awesome bit of work, and I suppose from a regional council perspective, it'd be good to have some structure and framework in place how we engage. So looking forward to just the kōrero briefly on that today. Transport Committee, obviously Api's been presenting to the board in relation to some of the kōrero, and that's been really great. We've had a few Zoom conferences and it was great to talk about road safety and initiatives for our rangatahi. How do we improve on that? when we look at Māori stats and accidents, and then I suppose a lot of Māori getting pulled over with no driver's licence and going through the court system and ending up in jail. Well, hey, how do we be proactive and reduce that? And then I suppose when we talk about monitoring and operational level, we said if we can impact on those rangatahi and take them away from the court system, then that'll be a great outcome in regards to transport and safer roads for the whole community. Just in relation to te ho o te rei, and that's around the wahi tapu, and obviously we're just going through, and there's a segment in our charter that we discussed when we were going through the charter, and it's just about protecting those cultural sites. And we want to strengthen that relationship with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council in relation to desecration done on those sites, then we need to go for a formal process to address those concerns. So that's going through a process now, and we're just waiting for the final report to come out, what action's going to be taken to that site. And if you look at Te Ho Te Rei, that was a gateway that into Whanganui-Orotu that guarded that entranceway out by the airport. So a very important site for our ahuriri marae and hapu. And we had just Mōtio Marae had the AGM and their election of trustees over the weekend, and I've just put the people that got re-voted back in. So we've got like anyone, we're planning for the future, and we've got some rangatahi that have come through. So always great when you've got succession planning happening within our Takiwā rohi. COVID-19, just around our health services and that. I know that's a shared discussion that we have for our whole community and nationally around improving health services in that health area. And we're looking through how do we provide those essential services in ahuriri, because we know there's a drain on Hiratonga. A lot of our whānau go over to Hiratonga and utilise their health services, and it's great, but then how can we do something proactive in ahuriri to provide a service? So we're just working with DHB and health providers to look at an alternative measure. And COVID-19 obviously highlighted that about delivery of service and how do we increase our outreach in that area. The Taiwhenua will be having AGM, so we're just going through confirming that date and where that's going to be held. Just on some action, the Moana plan change. Yep, we've had some meetings. We've had one meeting, and the big kōrero around the water. And I know we'll mostly cover this later on, but yeah, it's just around that engagement process. Yep, we've had one meeting with mana whenua and tangata whenua, but does that constitute enough kōrero? Potentially question mark on that. So maybe there needs to be more engagement with those people that attended that. It was great we had one meeting, but one meeting doesn't, if we're there to tick a box, don't tick no box, because we need to have further engagement and with those different organisations that were present. The discussions here, about that, and it was just, when we look at direction that we were going around frameworks and that, and I know it's going to be a big discussion still to come up, but around that Te Manatu Wai, obviously there's a lot of kōrero happening in that space. 1080, and that comes back to the pest management, and I know we contributed, I think 3 years ago, to the long-term plan and around pest management in the area. Obviously in Te Whanganui-Orotu with Hiniuru on Taupo Road, with the 1080 drops in that, obviously there's been court action taken and that was stopped. By whānau in that area, as in relation to wahi tapu, and I get back to that same question about wahi tapu and desecration. Obviously, if you're dropping poisons in that on their urupa, they're a major concern, and obviously that's going through a court process, and the trust are trying to work through, because the individual said, hey, they're aware that control needs to be done, but there's process in place to protect wahi tapu area and then the control measures. So I suppose from the Taiwhenua perspective, we're supporting on those whānau, especially around the wahi tapu. You just can't drop or put a bulldozer in the area, and there's wahi tapu in that area. Just the last point, and it was just around the kaitaki's work. I know we've had the debate around fisheries, and Katarain has been leading that with mahi up in Wairau, awesome mahi, and I know she got appointed to avoid that with MPI the other day, and that was great. And then we're looking at how do we, obviously succession planning, put someone in place down here to do some of that mahi. So we've had an individual that's put his hand up and we said, hey, we're supportive of him taking on some of that mahi, and then we're just going through the processes of how do we put him there to work with the regional council in regards, I know we mentioned previously about the new scanning system for white baiters and that, and he white baits and goes down the awa, so it's just about putting someone in place that we can support to do some of that mahi, because you can't do everything, so if we can get people that are passionate about that area, it's just going through the process to support that individual putting his name forward. And that's myself report. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. Mauri ora tātou, ka nui te mihi, ka nui te aroha ki a koutou ki a tātou I tēnei wā. I've been part of the Transport Committee since the 19th of June. I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of that journey. I've learned so much. It's a huge job. When we're talking about our 5 councils, huge job. And I've enjoyed being part of that big committee and being our cultural rep. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that many of our members are chosen for respective subcommittees to do with the council, but where's the support for those members? How much do you really want me to put into this job? Especially when we're all volunteers here. Where's the remuneration that should go with how much we should put into this work? We've got our transport hui on Friday. I have to get my head around 140 pages in the next couple of days. Do I get remunerated from that work that's required? You're here, James. Rex, you're here. Because, and some of the changes that we have made to our charter, we've emphasised that. The council needs to remunerate us accordingly. All our members who are chosen for your subcommittees. For too long, our people have been asked to be part of these committees, and at the end of the day, we get a cup of tea and a biscuit.
So we pay meeting fees for attendance.
So anyway, that's food for thought, and we don't have to carry on talking about it right now, but I'll leave that to our council to discuss in the future. And
Actually, I think you have, it's partai. I suppose they were just trying to work out the answer to that question. Would you like to get a response? It's a lot of work behind those committees, isn't it? Yeah.
Get a response. So just through the chair, I've just checked with Annalee, and it's our governance team, it's Annalee and Leanne, who very much administrate and look after the committee fees. And I've just clarified with Annalee, we pay the attendance at the meetings, but we don't pay for the preparation. So that's something that we're prepared to look at for those who are representatives on the different committees of council. It's something that we will take on board and look at.
It should be 150 pages or something. Yeah, it's just like my agenda at 150 pages.
Yeah. So, could I say, isn't that true for all of us? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the way it is. It's true for everybody.
Councillors are not paid on a meeting basis. They're paid a salary, and we went to salary basis for Regional Planning Committee Taiwhenua reps for the same reason, that there was a lot of work happening outside of the meetings. And when we did that last remuneration review the advice, for whatever reason, had been to keep to a meeting fee for the Māori Standing Committee. But I think in principle, nobody should be expected to work without being remunerated. So I think on the principle is understood, it's just what's the appropriate mechanism. But we're happy to review that as part of the long-term plan budgets.
Ka pai?
Think you
Ka
got it.
pai api?
Yeah. Ka pai.
Anything else about the regional transport? He did send a report and I haven't even got to read it.
You know, I suppose what I'm hoping for our people is to see something more tangible come out of it, you know, and hopefully it's in the near future, not 5 years down the track. So, kia ora.
And a kōrero we did attach that because we participated in the hui, so we were zooming again. But the kōrero was around the budget, and I suppose that when you're framing into the kōrero and some of these action points, and then what is there in the budget, does that reflect that engagement with Māori? And I put that around the kōrero in relation to rangatahi driver's licence. So when you set up and it's operational and you're talking that next level, but I suppose that's the measure. And I know in the framework we've talked about measuring, because I would like to see ourselves in the charter measured, because I want to be able to stand up in our hui and our marae and say, hey, this is what we've achieved as a committee. But then also we need to put that into these operational documents. Right, there's 5 million or whatever, then there's a percentage of that on Māori projects, and it might be the driving licence that's targeting rangatahi. Then you can measure, because if you can measure, you should be able to measure anything, because then that brings value. So I'm just saying in relation to up, and we discussed it with one of the persons, one of the policy first that was working on that Takiwā, and it'd be good to have a measure that we could track, could track as a committee, and that gives Api value when he sits on the transport committee. He can say, right, this is part of the budget, this is what we allocated to this, and then he can report back to the committee. As an example, a small example.
And he's a very good representative because he's broke it into our wānanga twice. So we're being well informed, and I'm glad to hear you enjoying your position. We said, you go on regional transport up here because you're a bus driver. You're right in the middle of it. So no, thank you. Was there any other, also just to mention, I know we did talk about it previously, it's about the digital capability for some of our members, so our whanganui rotu members need the support of the tablets.
So that's, I've got an action point here, I'll take that up with Leanne and with Anna Lee from our team. I thought we had surveyed to see who required the some time back, and so we responded in terms of those who needed them, or indicated they needed them.
I did request one.
So we'll follow up on that one there and come back. Thanks, Chair.
Can I just put this point to one of Peter's points here about like the 1080? I know that through our Taiwhenua experience, it's been the owner's choice to put 1080 or not. And year in and year out, we would go to or every 5 years, we would go to the consultation hui for our forestry blocks, and they were owned by the Crown. And of course, their main advisor was Doc. So they always said, well, thanks for your advice. And then they turned around and used 1080. Every time, it wasn't until we actually owned the forest back that we said no is no, so no became no, and we changed the ground teams. But the other point I want to make is that this is what they told us was that it dissipates in water. But you see all the devastation on land, you think, that probably transfers straight into the water. But the idea, they said it does dissipate. In fact, there's more natural 1080 appearing in waterways, probably through our puha and other things.
The watercress particularly?
Yeah. Well, yeah, so the thing is, if you don't own the land, you've got an uphill struggle. You're arguing with Doc, really, and their advice. And the only reason they do 1080 is because it has a big hit on the possum population at one time prior to them breeding, and kills them all. That probably kills out a couple of kiwis as well, but that's an expected loss. But they're targeting that time when they're giving birth. But obviously, it still doesn't make it any better. So I really haven't. What we used to do is, like, we made the deal with the at that time it was the Animal Health Board that when they drop the 1080, we get in there and test the water. And to be honest, we didn't find any blade traces of, because it just, more goes that fast, bloody thing just disappears. But it's all, yeah, you really got to look in the stream, even in the streams we didn't find anything. So it's an uphill battle if we're trying to prove it. We need to get some more science or something.
And just add to that, and sorry I've got to mention, and we're planting as well, and up the Ripoata catchment, we're just finishing, we've got planters up there today, funny enough, and they'll be finishing tomorrow planting our 50,000 mark. I think I mentioned it before, but we had another 5,000 they had to plant, so they finished that. And then we had our rangatahi up there on the weekend doing pest management, and they were out there laying ferrotox, and then so, ground-based, and getting our rangatahi to mahi, and it was good. We had the support of Central Pest Control Services, a local provider here in Hawke's Bay, and it's good to be working with those operators and them to mahi with our rangatahi. So I've got to acknowledge that because it was good for that business to go up and support our rangatahi to work in that mahi. So when you're looking at alternative measures, I suppose, we're aware that control has to be done. It's just how you do control.
Looking at the comparison as long as you're meeting, and I suppose just to add to Charlie's pahuira, tātou, we have the Patunamu and Wharerata Forestry, and it's no 1080 as well. So that's the policy there. So we're tangata whenua usually own land they don't want. Was anything else?
Kia ora.
No, kia ora, just on Te Whanganui Rotu as well, Pētani Marae, we've actually teamed up and we've got Te Huka o Waihinganga Water Care, so we've been part and parcel of the planting up at Estelle around Hukarere there. So big thank you to Hinawai, who I saw, and I thought, well, we got to start with a karakia and take this on board. So thanks, Hinawai, for starting our planting day for us. So just something that at our marae being part of Te Whanganui Rotu, that we've actually started engaging in a lot of things where our marae has always sort of sat on their outskirts. So that we've been involved with all this planting and getting involved in seeing where we sit and all these things around water care and everything to do with our hapu and our whānau. So kia ora.
Kia ora, Papa Tūnuku and our way, thank you. Aroha mai, I did something, I forgot you were over there, Mike. Heretaunga.
Joint report.
Was it a joint report?
Yes.
Oh, aroha mai. I was just making sure.
No, but
Do you have anything?
I have nothing to add. I've got a question just off the audit. As we approach Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, I just wanted to check, and this is really for our Hawke's Bay Regional Council staff. In the report, it's got Te Whanganui o Orutu. Now, I just need to check for our staff as to whether it's Orutu or whether it's Orotu. Well, I'm really coming back to here but in the report, we've got Orutu. Is that correct?
Rotu.
My mistake.
Oh, no, that's
yeah.
Orutu.
EU talking
Thank you. And just through the chair, through the chair, in the report, as Peter referenced the Mohaka plan change, and just for our minutes, I want to clarify, we have Kerry here, whose team leads the plan change in the Mohaka. We've taken a different approach to that plan change, and I just want to say we're genuinely entering that with tangata whenua, with mana whenua, and we're not about box ticking. I just wanted to make that point.
So will there, and I suppose, in relation to that, and that's good we've had one meeting, but I suppose moving forward, because there's some recommendations made by that collective about building all that partnership. So from that, because you can do desktop exercise sitting in an office and running some stuff out, but then it's different when you're kānoi to kānoi and you're hooing with the respective leaders within the ropu. So it'd be good to see that. Yeah, and acknowledge that we've had one meeting, next Takiwā, and then mostly put some measurements in regards to some outcomes. That's good. So acknowledge the mahi that regional council's doing, but yeah, continue on for that mahi.
More questions? Okay, well, we'll move on to tamatia. And firstly, karoha e te whanaunga, te whanau makitānara, rangitāne ki waira. Karoha te rina. My love for my family, my mother, my 82-year-old McDonald mother, from and so kia ora. So with that, if we could go on to tamatia. Dr. Marker?
Thank you. My apologies for not having a written report there. The major things that have happened from us is that as an overview, the Central Hawke's Bay District Council has produced a e-engagement document that we've fully endorsed, and we've participated in the production of that document, and it's quite different from most documents that I'm aware of that are around, and the aim of it is to get past sort of to have meaningful relationships with our people, and our people meaning the various groups within our people, not just sort of talking heads or just certain people, but the different various groups. And that's how we've operated there, and so there are marae groups, but there are people that are outside of marae groups too. So that document has been on its way, and also shortly for public scrutiny will be the notifying of the district plan. And the district plan has gone through an extensive process, and it looks like, and we as Tangata Whenua representatives have been engaged in that ever since it started in 2017. Again, I think that compared to the old district plan, or the current one, where the Tangata Whenua relationship was just cut and paste basically from government documents with no substance in it at all, to a complete chapter on addressing Tangata Whenua issues. And then throughout the whole report, our concerns are reflected. So those are two major movements in our engagement with local council, and of course the district plan relates to the regional plan, etc. So there's that connection there. There's three areas of focus that we've had in the last few months. They're a lead on from earlier on. From the lockdown came this notion of Community Action Network. So under the name of Tihei Tomatea, we are working with our communities and what are the areas of concern within those communities. And that's taken a life of its own and has attracted certain funding regimes from the post-COVID economic response, and they will become public in the next few weeks. Two specific programs or projects that interface with the work that we do here, but have wider implications. This one is called Ngāra Tīpuna I Tomatea, and there's been a public notification of that but it carries quite a deep thread of the establishment of ourselves and our wāhi tapu, and of sites of significance, and so we're having archaeological reports in the contents of that. So that specifically is the Waipukurau Park complexes. So there's 5 major sites in phase 1, which has been extended out to 7, 8 sites in phase 2, and depending on the way the funding works, we may move on to phase 2. So what that means is those past sites will, and where possible, they will have a whare kōrero there. So you can visit the site, and you can find out all about the history of and the importance and significance of that site. So it will be done both on the sort of older conventional way of information boards, but it'll also be done by technology through apps on your phone, and you'll be able to visit these sites and go on the app and hear that history in Māori and English. This project started not for the general public, but for our own people. So this was to connect our kids to the stories, and that before they forget them completely. Because our own teenagers and own kids are woefully ignorant of our own whakapapa and history. So this is partly us older ones trying to get younger generations to take notice. That spins off into the general public, which in turn spins into tourism. But it didn't start there, it started with our own people, us wanting to educate our own whānau. And of course that has implications for the environment that these things stand in. So that's past sites, and the next one related to that is Lake Whaituma. So the progress there is made is there's been appointment of a management group. So under the treaty settlement, we received the Western Shore back under our jurisdiction. So that's 100 hectares of that lake are now directly under our jurisdiction, and in charge of that is a management group. That management group is just forging its relationship with the regional council and with the district council first and foremost, and then landowners and so on and so forth. So all the issues you've been talking about on the restoration, about planting and that will take place. But it's just early days at this stage. We're not going to rush into planting programs until we've got the whole pattern of it organised better, because we can burn up a lot of energy chasing small pots of money and funding regimes and programming that come on board, and that's been the history of the place. So $10,000 here and $5,000 there, and all this has made no effect at all, has had no effect at all. So that lake is still way polluted beyond any standard whatsoever. So we're going to get the framework in place, which we think will take us about 9 months to do that before we even look at programs. Again, it ties in with other tupuna, it ties in with the regional plan, it ties in with district plans, as well as tourism and ecological project. So those 3 things, Tihei, Tomatea, Ngāra Tupuna and Whaituma have occupied us fully and will occupy us probably for the next year. So I'd just like to, on our representative point that we shared with the committee earlier, Paul has spoken to us for whānau reasons that he needs space, and so we're going to ask for leave of absence for Paul until next year, and we'll probably be using our proxy between now and Paul feels in a position that he can resume his work on this committee. And as I explained to everybody else, the significance of Paul's representation is that the way that our hapu settlement is in Tamatea is that from Pukehau to Rākau Tātahi are the majority of our marae. So we're all inland groups, but out on the coast of Porongahau, that has its own environment and its own group of people, and that's why Paul's presence is so important to us, because he represents the coastal people and the concerns that they have, which the rest of us on the other marae, ours is more inland plains and lakes. The Porongahau people and the related hapua about the coastal concerns. So that's the significance of Paul's representation. It's not designated anywhere as that, but that's the way we have worked it out.
Ka pai.
Ka pai.
Any questions for Dr. Mark? Okay, so it's good that we, someone to move that we received the Ripoata, Takiwā, Taiwhenua representative.
Happy to move, Madam Chair.
Happy to second.
Mike and Api, second by Api. All in favour?
Aye.
Māori? Pass. Then we move on to the Chair's verbal report that's going to be delivered by hear me?
Just while our CE is prepping for his agenda item, anei rā te whare me ki rā te kaunei rā ārohe a te matawa Māori e mihi rā kia koutou, me ki rā ngā ripoata, ngā kōrero, ngā mahi aringa e mahi e o tia i a koutou, kai runga ki tēnā, kai tēnā o ngā whai tuatanga o tēnei, ko te matawa Māori. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou katoa, mō na mahi.
Ngā mihi o tiata, kia koutou. Thanks for slotting me in. I wasn't actually on the agenda, but I'm happy to deputise for Rex. I won't be nearly as colourful as Rex will have been probably today. And I just want to talk about some probably reasonably boring stuff in terms of where the organisation's at, but it's important, I think, to give you a bit of context about where we're at right now. At the end of your agenda today, there is a significant activities report, and that gives quite a detailed breakdown of where the organisation is at on many of its projects. And so I don't propose to go into the detail, but perhaps just lift up and talk more strategically about where we're at. At this stage of 2020, it has been an incredibly challenging year for everybody, and I think I really just want to acknowledge how disruptive this year has been because of obviously COVID-19 and the uncertainty that it places over all of our lives about what the future looks like. We had a drought obviously in the first half of this year as well, the effects of which roll on. So for the staff of this organisation, we've been through that hugely disruptive period of lockdown, working from home, trying to keep the organisation going and running the regional civil defence response, and then getting back to business as usual. And I have to say that we didn't really give anybody a break in between. We flogged them hard for about 8 weeks, trying to do their day job, trying to do the civil defence response. True, also just to acknowledge Councillor Barker, who was also full-time on the civil defence response, as well as trying to keep his day job going as well. So it was an incredibly busy period, and we went straight back into getting on with all of our work. So there are many people in this organisation that are fairly tired. and with some trepidation, we have an eye to COVID resurgence. Of course, none of us know when we might be back in the situation of a lockdown, given what's happened in Auckland. So that's been a dominating feature of the year. We finished our financial year on the 30th of June, and we're just currently finalising our accounts with that. The council made a decision to carry forward some under expenditure from last year at our council committee meeting last week, which will just need to be finalised at the end of the month. But we're looking at finishing the year at $1.9 million deficit. The good news is that we've largely delivered everything we said we would deliver by way of services and activities for the year. But there was some delay to some programs as a result of COVID and the lockdown, and some additional costs which we hadn't planned on. We had an awful lot of staff time devoted to the welfare response and incurred some costs that we hadn't anticipated. So personally, I don't like carrying deficits. I like to run a little surplus at the end of the year and have a little bit of money that we can set aside for unexpected events. And fortunately, this council has built up financial reserves historically, so we can carry that deficit this year. As I think you should hopefully all be aware, the council made a decision to freeze rates this year, so hold the overall rate increase for this year, the 2020-21 year, at the same level as last year. And given that we've got planned growth and expenditure in the organisation and inflationary cost pressures across the organisation, we had been expecting a 7.3% increase this year, which essentially has been sucked up by the organisation. Now that combined, so that will require some borrowing, and that combined with an expected fall in our revenue, remembering that around half of the council's revenue comes from investments, and the majority of that comes from Napier Port, who have had some reduced trade, and obviously the cruise ship business is completely dried up. We are expecting that this current year will come in at around $6 million of deficit, which again will need to be borrowed. And while we can carry that level of debt, it's not sustainable in the longer term. We start eating into our reserves, and we start growing our borrowing. This year we will be borrowing around $20 million in total of both planned and unplanned borrowing. So that's debt that just starts growing and growing over time, which eventually needs to be repaid. So that's a segue into our long-term plan, and the work we're now doing with council is to write the next long-term plan, at least a consultation document to take to the community, and we'll be coming back to this committee with some proposals and ideas for discussion around that a little bit later on in the year, and then consultation in the new year with the community. And our challenge is going to be to balance the books, is going to be to catch up on that rates increase that was deferred, to phase out these deficits and get back to a break-even position, but also continuing to manage the growth in the organisation, which is necessary for a bunch of reasons that I'll come to shortly. And part of what we're also doing with the long-term plan is we're looking at all of our current operations and thinking about what can be reset to be more efficient and effective and more targeted to get better outcomes, but also to address some areas where over time our funding has not been keeping up with demand. And so a bunch of those areas are on the slide. So the compliance area, we have been under collecting what's required to run that service, and so that will need to be funded. Historically, we've funded our open spaces, that's our regional parks and cycleways, largely out of our flood schemes, which isn't really appropriate. We've been subsidising them, and they're going to need to be properly funded. We've had a growing deficit in the transport area, given that we haven't got the bus patronage that we would like, and the total mobility service continues to grow in demand. And the IT costs of this organisation are growing rapidly as well, as we move to a lot more digital platforms for things like environmental data collection, geospatial information, even the videos that we have of these meetings. All of it requires gigabytes and gigabytes of data and of storage, etc. So our IT costs are ballooning as well. That's pretty common across local government as we go to more digital ways of working. And look, that's just picking on a few areas. There's plenty of cost pressures across the organisation. And look, we've frozen our salary bands for this year, and there'll be minimal levels of wage increases in the organisation just given where we're at. But that won't be sustainable longer term as well. There's a lot of demand for the people that work in this organisation and the economy in those areas of engineering and science and what have you. So we'll be facing ongoing wage pressures as well. So all of that cumulatively puts upward pressure on rates, which is going to be pretty challenging for the council. Moved on. There we go. And look, just touching on where we're at as of today in relation to COVID. So I mentioned that we had a lot of staff deployed into the welfare response. There was around 60, I think, in total from the regional council that were deployed to the emergency coordination centre, 170 across Napier, Hastings and the regional councils. Huge efforts in Wairoa and in Central Hawke's Bay as well with those councils. So it was an all-team effort. And across local government, we put lots of people on the job of supporting that civil defence response with our community partners. Huge effort undertaken by the community as well. And just acknowledge, obviously, Tamatea and Heritonga and Wairoa Taiwhenuas and their role. Tiho Māori Order Centre, and it was the most extraordinary experience to have everybody put all hands to the pump and do what they can to support the community. And I think from what we've seen, we've done some surveying, and the survey results show that there are a significant number of people in the region that would have been in dire straits without the community's help. And we I think collectively did a very good job of meeting the needs of the community. Just in terms of our civil defence response alone, we distributed over $1 million worth of welfare support, largely in food parcels, a bit in helping out with accommodation and clothing and a few other needs. But that was obviously a big focus of April and May. In the meantime, our regional business partner program that we run for central government for trade and enterprise has been overwhelmed with small businesses needing help, particularly around financial planning, cash flow management, etc. And so we give out vouchers for them to get expert advice from advisors, typically around sort of the $3,000 per business mark, and over $1.5 million in central government grants we've dished out there. So that gives you a bit of a sense of how much need there is in the community. There's approximately 2,200 more people on the job seeker benefits in Hawke's Bay than there was this time last year. So that's a significant number of people who are currently out of work and looking for work. And overrepresentation of both Māori and Pacifica in those numbers. And also a reasonably significant number of women and youth. So people falling out of retail, accommodation, hospitality sector, and also in sort of logistics and warehousing. And it's really just a result of the contraction in the economy. So look, we're part obviously of the Matariki regional collaboration, and that work is coming together quite nicely right now. We employed a regional recovery manager who's working very closely with Tash Romano, who's funded by TPK and working out of Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated to coordinate our collective efforts around recovery. And there's a lot planned and a lot going on, a huge amount of capital expenditure. Hawke's Bay has received in the order of $330 million of central government funding for major projects over the last 12 months or thereabouts. Swimming pools, housing developments, it just goes on. Huge amount of work going to be undertaken. So the good news is that there's a lot of jobs coming. The challenge is fitting people who might have worked in retail or worked in hospitality to get them working in construction sites and this sort of work. So that's a very active program with MSD, Te Kahui Ohanga and our other iwi partners there around the Matariki collaboration. For the Regional Council itself, so we've been awarded 19 million of central government money for upgrading our flood schemes, and there's work in Wairoa around the Ferry Road riverbank erosion issue, in Hiritonga around the flood schemes here, and the Upper Tuki as well. So we're working with the other councils and the construction industry to create employment opportunities for those flood scheme upgrades. That's 3 years worth of work, so we're in the planning phase at the moment. And I think what I'd say is that when we were in the teeth of lockdown and people were losing their jobs and things were were falling apart pretty quickly, there was a degree of urgency around quickly finding jobs for people. And I think what we've found is that it takes time to train people, upskill people, match people to jobs, do the planning and project management. And while that's a bit of a delay in getting people into jobs, I think it also recognises that this whole COVID situation is likely to be with us for some time. And so the economy could have a headwind with no overseas tourism and some challenges around export markets and things for some years to come. So if we think about these schemes as multi-years, then it's all about rebuilding the economy over time. We've got a couple of other projects in the wings at the moment. So in your papers, it was noted that we've been awarded 3.65 million for expanding the Whakatapu Mahia Predator-Free project. So that's in contract negotiations at the moment, and that's predicated on setting up a trust to run that in partnership with Rongamai Wahine Iwi Trust and also the farming landowners up on the peninsula. So that's exciting and builds on previous work and coming together nicely. We've also been awarded 2.1 million to match a further 2.1 from our existing budgets to create a $4.2 million fund for fencing on erosion-prone land in the region. And so we're in contract negotiations with the Crown on that. And once we do, we'll be working with fencing contractors and requiring them to take on new workers and train them up around fencing. And I just say there that there's new regulations coming in. We've come in now, requiring progressive amount of fencing of all waterways in the region over the next few years. And at the moment, I understand it's really hard to get a fencing contractor anyway. There is a lot of work for fencing over probably the next decade. Lots to be done there, and so hopefully we can create some skilled workforce that will have longer term jobs in that business. And then there's more funding available. So up on the screen I've got J4N. That means Jobs for Nature. So Jobs for Nature is the overarching brand of $1.3 billion worth of central government money for a whole range of environmental initiatives, including an expansion of the Te Mana Otawai Fund. So those funding rounds are running again right now, and there'll be another one again before Christmas. So we are looking at putting through a whole bunch of bids around our freshwater catchments and standing up regional alliances for conservation and biodiversity. So we've had discussions with Department of Conservation here, and I believe that DOC will be getting around the region, essentially marae by marae, and having conversations about participation in these regional alliances. And again, this is about creating jobs, particularly for people who are in work but at risk of losing their jobs, and their businesses might want to give them 6 months working on a conservation project to avoid making them redundant. So look, there's lots of help, and the challenge is matching the help to the people, as I said. And then the other thing which hangs in the background, of course, is the possibility of going back into alert level 3 or 4. So we remain very much in a state of readiness around that. So our civil defence team are constantly on standby for that possibility and working with the DHB, police, etc., for what would happen if we go into a regional lockdown that requires us to close the regional borders, much like has happened in Auckland. So that remains a possibility, and we hope it isn't so. So look, if I think about that long-term plan and what lies ahead, we've just in the last few weeks had the government's freshwater reforms finalised, and it requires a massive acceleration of effort. There's new regulations which have now come into force around wetlands, winter cropping, fencing, as I mentioned before, and this is very challenging. Just to pick on one of those to give you a sense of it, winter cropping, we think there are 600 to 700 farms in Hawke's Bay that undertake winter cropping. The regulations require those winter cropping operations to avoid things like pugging in the paddock, where animals are left for too long and create a bit of a mud bath. So they're not allowed to have pugging, I think, below a depth of, I think it's 5 centimetres.
5 centimetres.
Yeah, 5 centimetres below the surface. This is really stringent. Now, the challenge we've got is that not all these winter cropping operations happen near a road. They'll happen at the back of farms all over the region. And as I say, 600 to 700 farms with multiple winter cropping. So we're going to need to have a compliance team that through the winter can get to all of those properties repeatedly and survey what's going on and undertake enforcement if necessary. This is a massive challenge nationally. No one's quite figured out how we're going to do it or how we're going to fund it. But the key to it will be farm environmental plans and having effectively farmers doing the right thing rather than having to run around doing compliance, checking and prosecuting people. So, look, those regulations are a big deal and are a big challenge for this council as for all the other regional councils. There's a new process around the plan changes, and so we're already working on a timetable to set limits on water quality and quantity in every water body in the region. It was by the end of 2025. It's now going to be the end of 2024. As I think hopefully you're all aware, we need to provide for Te Mana o Te Wai. The thing which excites me about Te Mana o Te Wai is that at last, I think, in the resource management system, we're getting away from this notion of balancing the environment versus the economy. And we're actually getting back to a point where we're understanding that the environment comes first and that the economy has to work within the environment's limits, and that the environment has to be healthy to support the economy, and without a healthy environment we don't have anything, we don't have an economy anyway. And so that's quite a different way of thinking about it. The mana of the water body, the mana of Te Taiwhenua more generally is the priority, then providing for human health after that, and then industrial use, extractive use, economic use comes third. So that's the hierarchy that's been set in the new national policy statement, and that's what we will need to provide for. And obviously there's a lot that sits in there in relation to cultural practice, mahinga kai, etc., and our need to make greatest use of mātauranga, cultural health monitoring and what have you, which obviously there's been a trail blazed by Māori in particular, and Maori, black, in Tukituki. We've got to now scale that up region-wide. So that's going to be a big part of those the limit setting. The one comment I want to make to you about that is we face a bit of a trade-off here. The government wants us to go faster. The community, I think, wants us to go faster. They want limits in place. They want controls on land use that's damaging our waterways, and they want our waterways cleaned up. But if they want us to go faster, we are not going to be able to have the sorts of processes we had, like with tank. We don't have the time to spend years in discussions and collaboration. The Regional Planning Committee won't be able to spend 2 years deciding whether it's going to notify a plan, as it did with tank. And look, I accept my share of responsibility for our contribution to some of those delays with things like science delivery and whether we answered all the questions and fulfilled everybody's expectations adequately. But we're just going to need to move a heck of a lot faster in making decisions. And I think we're going to have to shift away from worrying whether we've got the policy settings absolutely right to setting them as best as we think we can, and then monitoring and adapting over time. And if we're not getting the results, we're going to have to change them. But we won't have the time to go through long, deep consultation and engagement to the extent that we would have previously done. So that's a bit of a challenge for everybody, a bit of a trade-off in that. Look, farm plans, so we've done tuki-tuki. We did over 1,000 of them in the tuki-tuki. Well, this year, or this coming year, they're all up for renewal because they have to be refreshed every 3 years, and then we've got to do the rest of the region, which is over 5,000. That's a massive job. Meanwhile, tank still rolls on, as you know. Outstanding water bodies rolls on with hearings flowing into the new year, and then we've got the water conservation order that's not resolved. So the whole planning work program is going to remain full on. Water security, so we have a regional water assessment underway looking at future demand and supply on fresh water, land use, use of water by our urban communities, massive piece of work, really important, so that's well and truly underway now. And our physical investigations in the Ngātaroto and Tuki-Tuki catchments around water security solutions there as well, with managed aquifer recharge in Tuki-Tuki, and above ground storage in the Ngātaroto catchment. And the idea is that all of it comes together for a decision point of council, which we'll need to do in partnership with this committee and with the Regional Planning Committee around the future of water use and those choices between water conservation, efficiency, land use change, as well as physical water storage opportunities. So that's big and all lies ahead. And look, to achieve all of this, we need more consent staff, we need more compliance staff, we need more planning effort, and we're having to reprioritise our science effort to fresh water. So some areas like perhaps some of our biodiversity monitoring or coastal monitoring might need to be reprioritised to fund the fresh water effort. And it's all important, but it's all about what's achievable. And again, we have to also think about how much carrot and how much stick. So historically, the regional councils worked with rural landowners very much around encouragement, education, providing incentives. All that costs money, and with a finite budget, we have to decide whether we keep doing lots of that or more of it, or how much we just focus on being a regulator, setting rules and having compliance staff. So we can choose whether we have people going up farm driveways being helpful, or we can have people going up undertaking compliance and enforcement. So that's a big choice for the council in the coming year. And just one final slide. And look, while fresh water is huge, we've got plenty on the rest of the organisation's books to do as well. So we're currently reviewing our biosecurity work, and over the last few years we've put a lot more effort into biodiversity, particularly restoration of ecologically important habitat, more predator control. But we've got an awful lot of plant pests in the region which are continuing to grow and being a problem. Possum numbers are growing in some areas, and so whether we've got the right mix of resourcing is a key question, and that'll come through our long-term plan. The council's made really clear that they expect climate change to be the epicentre of our long-term plan, and we've already got a big program in adaptation around upgrading the flood schemes, lots on water security, and the work we've been doing in our coastal environment around sea level rise. Some big choices ahead about how to fund our coastal protections and who's going to fund that, so that's coming up in the next year. And then on the mitigating climate change side of things, the council's clear it wants to see us do both adaptation and mitigation. So that goes to transport. Do we put more money into public transport and alternative forms of public transport? Is there more we can do to support people getting into electric vehicles and out of petrol cars and onto cycleways? Is there more we can do with households? Our Sustainable Homes program has been hugely successful and is currently over budget and overspent. So lots of houses are going to solar and doing insulation, double glazing, the team tells me is really popular. So there's more we can potentially do to help households. Is there more we can do with industry around their footprints, particularly around industrial energy and industrial heat? A lot of natural gas burnt in the region around industry. And then there's the farming community, and farming is responsible for the biggest proportion of greenhouse gases in our region, principally from sheep and beef farming and dairy. So lots that lies ahead for us as an organisation working with landowners on that. The council's also indicated that it wants to use our investment funds more actively to fund local economic development. And in there will be some choices around investing in things which might not result in income in the short term, but more growth in the long term. And we've got to balance that against the cash needs of the organisation. And every dollar we don't get from investment income is a dollar we have to collect in rates. So that's part of the choice that lies ahead. And look, if at the risk of stating the obvious, the COVID economic uncertainty creates a real challenge for us in doing 3-year budgets. We don't know what our financial situation is going to be like. And I think more importantly, we don't know what the community is going to be facing in 12 months or 24 months. So if we're looking at a rates increase next year of between 20 and 30%, which to do most of what I've talked about will be necessary, that's a big conversation with a community that might be still in some form of recession and facing some challenges. And we just don't know how quickly the world's going to rebound and the national economy is going to rebound. So that's all pretty challenging. And then there's just how fast can we move. And one of my big lessons, I guess, I've learned over the last 3 years is you can put a lot more money into growing the organisation, but there are challenges in attracting people with the right skills and expertise. There's a real shortage of just about all of the areas that we need experts in this organisation nationally, including in areas around te ao Māori and tikanga and those sorts of things. I mean, there's these requirements around te mana o te wai. We need people with expertise in both RMA planning, but also in working in ways te ao Māori as well. So that's a challenge, but it's across all of our demand areas. And then when we grow the organisation, we need more buildings, we need more cars, we need more IT equipment. All of that stuff goes with it. And so what we're trying to think about at the moment is how can we deliver more, but doing it much smarter? How can we use technology? How can we use community partnerships? How we can mobilise the resources of others to achieve that more, but doing it in an affordable sense. So look, just in conclusion, I'd say that the challenges for this organisation around freshwater, around biodiversity, around climate change, just continue to grow. These issues are getting more and more important as the stresses on our environment become more and more revealed. We've got more cars on the road today than we had last year and the year before that. We've got more houses being built. Now, all those things result in zinc and copper in our waterways. They put more pressure on soils and land. They put more emissions in the air. So we're still caught in a growth mentality of more business, more people, more inward migration to the region. It all puts pressure on water, on land, and on the environment. So we're kind of running to catch up. We've got a lot to do, and it all needs to be funded. So that's what lies ahead. So I'm really happy to take any questions. Chair?
Can I just, on the Chairman's report, deputise for the Chairman as the Deputy Chair, and say firstly, Rex puts in his apology for today. He suffered a tragic loss. His very good friend Pam O'Keefe passed away on the weekend at the Tangi on Saturday, and I presume most of you will know that Rex has worked very closely with Pam and Henati at Te Aranga Marae. And Pam was the engine of the place. I don't know how they're going to replace Pam. She just had such a big heart, and I heard some wonderful things said about her, and they're all true, in that she judged nobody, she helped everybody, she gave everything she had, she wanted for nothing herself, and she just gave and gave. So Rex is there with the Marae Committee, and they're working out what they're going to do for the future. Could I just add a couple of things to James's report? James is focused, as he should and must, on a lot of the operational things. And if your head isn't spinning before you got here, I hope it's spinning now, because it is an enormous amount of work. I think it's beyond what most people could conceive. But on the other side, I want to picture something else in more the strategic environment. We have an election coming up in October. And the first point I'd make is that this is going to be a change for New Zealand, not in the way most people think. I voted for the first time in the election of 1972, and I was part of the baby boom generation. My generation have held sway electorally for decades. We've been the biggest chunk. We came out of schools in our thousands. I go home to my hometown now and find there's so few kids. But when I was there was kids for miles. You could hardly see an adult. So this enormous number of kids born after the war dominated. This election is going to be dominated, in my view. This is going to be the last of the elections where the baby boomers dominate. And it's going to be generation, the millennials and Generation X. There's going to be a shift. Shift in a whole range of ways, in attitudes and values and so on. And I have to say to you, I welcome every bit of it. I have no worry about this. The next generations coming along are going to be fantastic. The old ways are changing. The second thing I'd add to that in a more sort of more strategic way is that I think when we come past the election, there's going to be significant change. If anybody hasn't seen this, well, it's there. 3 waters. Everybody accepts that the councils, the structures have let us down on the waters. Too small, too complicated, and there's a firm determination to change that. Well, that's going to have a dramatic impact on council structures around New Zealand. The second thing is been the rewrite of the RMA. And it's going to be much more regional focused. Again, unwritten, this is going to have a significant impact on council structures. And then there's going to be the health reforms. No one thinks New Zealand is in the best place it could be today, and everybody looks around and thinks we can do things better. So I feel we're going to be in a period of substantial reform. I'm reluctant to use the 1980s because a lot of people feel that wasn't that good. It sort of come out of the sky and fell on top of us. I remember it very well. I used to wake up every morning at 10 to 6, turn the radio on and listen to the 7 o'clock news to see what had happened overnight, what was going to happen today, who got run over the top of. It was the most dynamic time you could ever imagine. Nothing been like it since. But the truth is, since then, nothing's happened, with really a few exceptions. Oh yes, we've got smoke-free, and we've got tertiary fees paid for, and a few other odds and ends. But in terms of restructure of the New Zealand society, New Zealand economy, there's been very little done. I remember sitting, as I do on occasions, in an office in Wellington, the Ministry of Justice. I work out of there from time to time, and an email came around asking me to identify the achievements of John Key. Well, I thought, yes, I'm the last person you should send this to, so I left it blank. But so did everybody else. And what it was John Key was leaving, but apart from being a nice person, people thought highly of him, what were the things that he had changed or done? And people couldn't think of them. Audrey Young, his best supporter, the New Zealand Herald, struggled to come up with a list. The point I make is that we have done little in decades, and the world around us, the environment around us, has changed and moved on. Things do need to change, and I think we should welcome that. So then becomes a matter of, what do we do? Do we sit back and wait for things to move around us, or do we become active participants and help and shape the direction of things? And this is one of the issues this council is going to have to be involved in my view. Are we going to try and allow the way in which our local government structure is there? My view is that it echoes with great High Court Judge Randerson in the RMA document he wrote. We had 78 councils around New Zealand, and basically they were incapable of doing the job required of them. Too small, too ineffective. Wow, I agree with that. So I just think I'm encouraging you to think about these other issues and to get, without actually trying to figure out all the answers ourselves, because we won't do that. But I do think we have to figure out, there's going to be, after October, whatever the shape of the government, I feel there's going to be a wall of change. And we all have to grapple with what these issues are and voice an opinion and welcome it, in my view, and try and shape and direct it, because it's overdue.
Oh boy.
Māori.
Look, James, that was a great update. I mean, you can see where people get to probably not be able to go to bed early or sleep at night. And, you know, these are the sorts of real issues. So not too bad for someone that didn't prepare too much to come in and give us this boof. And it is alongside of what you're saying, Rick. You know, we have a saying, me whati te tikanga, when things in our tikanga world change, then we have to change with it and find a new one. So just putting it out there too as well that, of course, you know, we're very passionate, you know, when you start to talk with mana whenua, tangata whenua about pūtaiao, and just to affirm that, you know, I guess that passion does roll out in places where you seem to be kind of opposing to each other. But, you know, look, you're not the opposition. We're all one. You know, we're just passionate.
Well, that's good. I'm pleased to hear that.
You know, you need to know that, you know. I mean, we get ourselves into a bit of a headlock at that time, but I just wanted to say that it's just our expression of how passionate we are with these things and take on board everything that's being said about this. I mean, when I say holistically, it's both the four well-beings, economically, socially, culturally and environmentally, and the well-beings that go with this kind of holistic view. So huge changes, as you say, Rick, you know. You only got to look at where the RMA is posed to be sitting to be replaced and just look into that national policy statement around urban design and the impacts that that is potentially looking at, particularly on the plains of Heretaunga and the you know, the retention and particularly, you know, good soil productive land type kind of thinking that's going into that. You look at the three waters, now here again, you know, we challenged ourselves. Everyone's going to be challenged. We have this kind of sanctity moment where we need to, as mana whenua, provide our own expression on a water catchment, for example. When you have a government, and depending on how this is going to roll out, looking at setting up 5 or 6 authorities just around that whole, you know, and looking at what that potential design will be. Whoa, that puts challenges on us in terms of our own ability to represent our single view in amongst a much wider regional situation. So it's going to impact on us as tangata whenua in terms of how we see representation going forward. I agree totally that I think there has to be a quickening process in amongst processes, and certainly we've learnt, I think, by a huge example where we could start to clip a few of those things back. I certainly would welcome that, but also just need to ensure that while we have got the ability to innovate around accelerating some of these things, please don't let it leave us out of the design at the early stages of all of this. Yeah. We've got opportunities right now, and we'll be talking about that in some of the minor matters coming up very shortly. We're promoting that kind of closer relationship with each other, taking on board some of the specialist attitudes or professional kind of capability within an organisation. We struggle with that as well. And so part of the answer to all of that, I think, James, is actually moving closer to each other more than having to assume that when we discuss things that you take those things away, you generate some kind of response to it, we're out of the picture. So I'm just trying to just point in that direction. I agree with everything that's going on because of the pressures. You only got to look at what happened during COVID when there were less of vehicles, activities on roads, on rivers,
all of us saw the return of Mother Nature come back in some significant way. It'd be great to kind of tail in a period of time going forward that maybe we need to exercise a stop gap in enabling Mother Nature to kind of repair herself. Big call. A couple of things that I just want to pick up, particularly with what I am going to bring up a little later on in terms of the support around some of the efforts that are going on, particularly with monitoring. We do have a situation with that Jobs for Nature, big bundle of money. And I know you've got a few bids in there, and of course it all comes down to what you've just described in terms of council's deficit. We've got to look for new money in the system, and potentially I just put it on Pieri that in my response to an earlier discussion that perhaps council needs to be leading the charge to actually support some of the effort that's being proposed here. We get into this bundle of time space where this month, as you've made alluded to, a number of different funding packages and parcels are around. You know, we're not strangers to this. We jump into that. We spend a lot of time in putting all of that together. And of course, disheartening when, of course, it has to fit into a certain criteria, you get declined. And so these things go on for 3 or 4 years. I think we've got to change the attitude a little bit. Might be putting something on to you, Pieri, and your team, insofar as having to shape up a few of these funding applications in a joint manner relevant to some of the matters that you know, both Karanaina and others have been talking around the table, and it's to complement the whole effort. So just put that down for the moment, but do appreciate this update amongst everything else. So kia ora.
Just adding to that, thank you both for your reports. James, I think it's just building on what Mare has said. Yeah, we understand things are going to speed up. So it is around the quality of the consultation that will take place going forward. If we're just going to have what we've had in the past, which is the reporting model, that's not going to work to take us forward faster. It is using our Māori concepts, and one of those is wānanga. It's our ability to wānanga the issue out together, and then formalise the outcome once we've reached the agreement or the direction that we're moving in. I think that gives a far better solid result, especially for us going forward, and I think at the end of the day for council. So yeah, so that's what I would say. I look at the three waters, especially in regards to the cultural impact report and how that was received by councils. So that was pretty much through that wānanga process. Although I will say that perhaps the contractors felt a bit bashed up to start with. I think they got over it once they realised the format was slightly different to what they were used to. But it was about the outcome and the quality of the outcome that was important. Kia ora.
I just got a point, just acknowledge the mahi the regional councils go through, because it is, we're in a period of change, and yeah, it's difficult operating and with all the challenges that are coming up, and I suppose the same challenges could be said for Māori as well, because obviously we attend this hui, but then we attend hui with DOC, with all the other government agencies, and so you know, when you look at your work schedule, you look at all this, and then you look at all the other different challenges we have working for those other agencies, and then you obviously got to do your mahi. I just pick up the point that Api said about resourcing, and then where do you put your time and energy, and our leadership within our Taiwhenua structures. Obviously they rely on individuals in this room to do all that mahi. So a lot of mahi coming out for regional council, but then obviously a lot of mahi coming out for our Taiwhenuas and that as well. And then how do you allocate time, because you're short of time? So that'll be a big question that we all have to look within our own ropa. How do we succession plan building going forward to give the mahi and support to the different activities everyone has to undertake? That's just a little short corridor for our whānau, and you've got to take care of your own health, because as we discussed in our other hui, you've got your own whānau to look after as well as the other challenges within your Taiwhenua. Nā mihi.
Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. Just want to tautoko everything that's been said up to now by Maori and Mike, Pete, Rick. But most of all, I want to say to you, James, a man that can put a report like you've just put up there. I looked over there to see where your notes were. You're a man that lives what he says. And that's a privilege to us to be with a guy that lives totally in his work. What I want to add is you're a bit afraid of no scientists. Well, they're here in this room. And a lady like Katarina, you may have to ask her how that stuff she put up on the board works. But I can tell you that the closer we get together and start utilising some of the assets that we have sat on for years, and no one has ever asked us about, and now we're there. And Rick is right. We are in a period of change, a big period of change. I'm an old man and I've been in all sorts of situations, and I'm excited. I'm excited. And I just want, when you give me my leave, to say we're just in a rough time. Do mate e porangahau at the moment. My wife is close. I've got a sister that's close. Just need a bit of time to step back. And I apologise for not putting my effort in up to this point. And I appreciate what Roger's given porangahau. Ngāti kere. An opportunity to bring the coast and those little bits of wisdom. And as I said to our Hawke's Bay Regional, Hawke's Bay Council, you want to learn something, don't sit in that desk at Waipukuro or Waipawa, get out to porangahau. If you don't have anywhere to go, come and see me. And my offer is the same to you guys. And come out with your take, let us put a bit of input in. And that's the same with all the Taiwhenua here. This is, you've got yourself a nest of knowledge second to nothing. Second to nothing. You only got to work out how we're going to use that knowledge for the future. Because whoever gives it amidst all these other systems, Māoridom has just carried on. Did its thing. So, deep appreciation, James, for your effort. And you've got a man here that close to us. He's right in my heart here. So I'm not going away. I've just asked our Māori committee to keep me in touch with everything, and I'll put an effort in, especially workshops. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
Ia re. Aroha ki ngā kōrero ne. Ngari kei te tika roho ki ngā kōrero. You know, I was saying to Mara, you know, I could have said exactly what you said, but not as sweet. For the years that I've been on this council, you know, I can feel the changes are starting to come into force now. And to hear the stories from even Rick, James, I kept looking at the board, looking at you. He's not even reading anything, he's looking at us. Yeah, you know, when you first arrived here, you know, we had a big pulpiti for you at Waipatu. You've never let our people go. Not like others in the past, you know, but listen to, we finally think we got someone that we can talk to and listen to us. You have to go to the coal face for the people. But the other thing I like too is the wānanga that now will prepare to start. Instead of having direct contact from all councils, not only the regional council, city councils, district councils, as you come to them, right, well, everyone's up in ears. They haven't had any pre-warning about, when they get there and they start to bring up their kaupapa, wow. And a lot of the young people, I can just see them today, you know, they're growing now, of course, but they're really living up. So, you know, we hang in here as long as we're elected to be on this committee and to try and steady the ship and to hope we can take all that korero to each and one of our people. It's only a small group, you know, I mean from Wairua down to Taumatea, but it's such a strong feeling amongst our members within those Taiwhenua to apina our people. Because all the ones that went before me and us, you know, they were kicking around and, you know, really coming in with taiahas and everything to do battle. And it's certainly come to fruition now that this thing is sort of, I can know it's changing. So I'd just like to thank that report and the report from our Taiwhenuas. On behalf of me as being that kaumātua, as a kaumātua, and, you know, the kaikone ki ngā kōrero. You got all these young ones, you know, Peter here, Peter Eden. You know, just say, oh, geez.
Rangatahi.
Take it.
It's got off
You need it. And Roger, of course, Roger Marker, I've had a lot to do with him in the past, right through, you know, when he came back from overseas and joined the council of Taiwhenua and the EIT. So, but they're all related anyway to Takiwā. Yeah. Le le kāre nui aki. Me le ke ka hatu ne tata.
Kia ora, uncle.
Kia ora.
And I don't think you can speak after. Oh, okay. Thank you, everybody, for your kōrero, and I just see it as te aroha for our taio, a responsibility that we all share, and if we work together as one kotahitanga, amazing what we'll be able to accomplish. Kia ora. Everyone, and following that, if someone can move the Hawke's Bay Regional Council's chair's report delivered by James, moved by Paola and seconded by Army.
Yeah,
All in favour?
Aye.
I think everybody's against. Carried. Thank you. I was just looking at the time. It's 12:20. We have a lot of interesting and informative reports today. So we'll just try and get through the, if we can get to the golf minor items after the follow-ups, and then we'll break for lunch. Will it be ready at 12:10?
Yeah, it will be.
So the follow-ups, if we go one by one there, that's about the Opaitama. So I have a question about that. So I know Opaitama whenua. So all Opaitama mana whenua have advised that the disposal site has now sealed. They also advised online there was a tractor on the beach and quad bikes riding over the kai beds. So that's damage to well-known Mahinga Kai area. What have you found out around there? I mean, there's a tuatua, mussels, what else we got up there? Inanga. So I'm not quite sure why they're going over there, but it's also compacting the sand dunes. And I'm noticing that the driftwood's coming up, so the sea is in the river mouth, the river there, the oa there, are starting to come up onto the whenua where the sand dune naturally usually blocks it, but the freedom camping vans are sitting on the beach, so they're affecting the sand there. Also, recommendation that there is also further follow-up action due to the compact of this, compacting. So maybe if there was some sort of suitable barrier befitting the aesthetic of the beach, so large rocks, put in place to protect the mahinga kai, not the building sites of owners. So I noticed there's supposed to be some building sites there on that Waihi Tapu. Second point this is to Liz and Tania. This is not the first time Wairua District Council have installed a wastewater system without consent. The first being the illegal discharge of Fitzroy Street into our beloved awa, And although I know there was no appreciable difference in treatment quality for Potama, we must not deviate from the fact that on 2 occasions there have been installations without consent near to water bodies that are used for mahinga kai and recreation in both Potama and Wairoa. This is completely unacceptable. So I just want to comment and note that. And hopefully that we can put some sort of barriers up. I mean, those tuatuas are young. We don't want to ruin that. If you have quad bikes on there and they crush the tuatua, they will move. They will move. And it's been there mai rā anō. So that's just my comment on that. And I did engage with mana whenua at all Potama and go to the sites. So, I did talk with them last night and they relayed that, wanted me to relay some of those messages onto the regional council. Anybody else?
Takiwā. Kia ora. Just with item 6 on that table around science charges for marae, where did that land? There's a bit of an explanation there, but in terms of a remission policy, where can we go from now?
So, following the council workshop on the Section 36 charges of 2 weeks ago, I think, from memory, there's a paper coming back with some options around that for council, I think on the 23rd of September.
Okay.
So the issue's coming back for decision making. Yep, so it's being explored.
Is there any chance it can come back here?
We'll look at perhaps look at the committee timetable and see when it works in with the LTP policy development. But given that we'll be bringing back a range of LTP issues to this table, it can certainly be part of that.
Thank you.
You want to speak to them? Anyway, did you want to speak to number 2, Katarina? Just update, James.
Just to update you, James and Pierre, on my late report. I have requested another week. I have since been to Auckland and had all my gear on stolen New Zealand.
Hey.
2 laptops, etc. at a wānanga while I was at Auckland, and I've been able to populate most of my work because I've had it in the cloud, and so that's what I want to do, is just repopulate that. Nothing's lost, it's just trying to put it together in such a short time. Aroha mai. I have got a summary and a draft ready. That's all I could offer for now, but if you could be patient with me and provide me with another week, and it should be in. And what you saw today was a summary.
Through the chair, will 1 week be sufficient, Katarina?
Yep, definitely.
Number 3, it might be you, Peter.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. And I suppose in regards to making good decisions, I'm fully supportive of that training. I've done the initial training, and I know Pahuera supported about 5 years ago when we all done the training. About 20 whānau went through that training. And so we had a lot of people that went through. I suppose good to have a knowledge, and James mentioned about the RMA and then about commissioners, and with Te Manawa Te Wai in their document, they talk about people having a knowledge of mataranga Maori, and I suppose just as committee members, it makes us more effective if you're able to undertake that training. I'd thoroughly recommend doing it. There's a lot of mahi, and you've got to do it in assignment, but there's some supports and that in place to undertake that work. So yeah, I think that's awesome opportunity if you have got the time to do it.
Then thank you, Peter, for championing that. Liz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just an update on that. There is actually a course being held in Napier on the 5th and 6th of October. Okay. Now that's actually quite recent because it was a deferred one from a couple of months ago when Auckland went into level 3 lockdown. They had to postpone it. But there may still be spots available.
Good decisions.
Yeah.
And that's all when is it? Napier?
In Napier.
Oh, that's better than having to go to Wellington.
Could I just add to that as well? So first point is just to acknowledge all of the members of the Māori committee, because we surveyed a wee while ago just to identify who had done the courses, who was interested in the chair certification, and where the recertification was at. So we've got all that information that we'll send out to you, so everyone's well aware of that. But I think the other point is that I'm just being advised that MFE, and I think it's Opus that they use as a provider for that, are re-looking under the COVID restrictions about future MGD courses. So it's good news to hear that 5th and 6th of October. The only point I'd add to that is that there are pre-assignments that are required as part of the MGD course, and it requires a bit of work. So if you're looking at enrolling for the 5th and the 6th of October, expect that there's a bit of homework. Mahi a kaina.
A lot of homework.
A lot of homework.
2 or 3 months worth of it.
You'll keep in touch with us, or Liz?
We'll follow up on the 5th and 6th of October.
So follow up on the follow-up. Yeah, which is too far away. Next one is yours, Peter.
Anna Lee, can you put that PPT up, please? Just while Anna Lee, I know I said it was going to be a verbal, but I think the question was raised around cultural competency within the organisation, HBRC, but also around the treaty framework that's been used. I do note that within the new charter, in terms of reference, the draft that will be discussed later, there's quite a bit of narrative and text in there in terms of a treaty framework and approach. So I just wanted, there's about 8 slides up here, and I thought this might be a better way of me just sort of being a bit of a talking mouth here, and you forget the first thing that I might have said today. So I just wanted to acknowledge, in terms of Māori, none of this is unfamiliar to anyone around this table. And this just acknowledges the broad context within mana whenua and Māori tangata whenua that you're working in. And I just want to say we acknowledge and we're mindful of that. And I think a wee bit came up earlier, Peter, when you're talking about we're busy in here, but actually you're very busy out there trying to cater for everybody's needs. It's a serious thing that we and across our inter-council friends across the other councils, the other 4, we're looking at in terms of how do we reduce the impact upon tangata whenua, because we're all coming and asking you for time and effort. So that's something that we need to look at. Yes, please, Mike. Thank you. Oh, there we go. So this is just a wee bit about that first slide. Just looking at Te Ao Māori, James was talking about this. We're trying to get better internally of HBRC as to what that means and how that should be applied. What we do acknowledge is we can't do that without chair. Relationships, and this ties in a wee bit with the last bullet point here. Relationships at the end of the day are the litmus test about you getting through the peaks and the troughs. Ngā piki me ngā heke. Because when we get into discussions, sometimes we have hard discussions. We might not agree. It's the tenor of the relationship that gets us through and onto the other side, is the point made here. The other parts there, I won't go through them individually. You're well aware of those. Yes, please, Mike. Kia ora. I want to bring it back and just talk about we're required under legislation, under regulations to do certain things, notwithstanding that some of that is there's change in the wind coming with RMA as we discussed. But I just wanted to briefly cover these, and this is what we're required to within HBRC to work within the parameters of. Yes, please, Mike. For us, it's important to understand the implications, the relevance for local government. It's very much about a focus on the principles, and it's referred to in the Local Government Act and also in the Resource Management Act as it is currently scripted and in law. Kia ora, Mike. Oh, it's a new Siri. And the statutory framework for the council. So these are some of the ones that sit in behind us. As an example, up in Auckland, they've got 250 obligations under 30 statutes. We haven't sat down and actually counted what ours are, but ours would be significant. It's similar across most of the regional councils in this time. Kia ora, Mike. As an example, under Section 4, not unfamiliar space for us. And when we get into hard headlocks, I think was the term used earlier on, then sometimes these get pulled out as part of the measure. I just want you to know that we're mindful of this, and this very much provides the parameters within which we're required to work as HBRC. And of course, the reference there to 14.1D. We're not strangers to the requirements that sit in each one of these. Kia ora mai. Just looking a wee bit wider, and this is very much with Kerry's team, in terms of looking at marine and coastal area. A lot of that is just sort of, it's starting to hit the straps right now. The no ownership regime, which came back from, when was it, 2004, around about that time. But this marine and coastal is part of our brief, and it's moving through its processes right now as we speak. Kia ora mai. The other one which comes through in terms of the RMA was mana whakahono. So I know that there's one sitting with Napier City Council at the moment. There was an approach this time last year from one of our local hapu, but because of the specifications under the RMA, we weren't able to advance that. That said, we've taken a different pathway on that. So that's a wee bit about what sits in our brief as part of the RMA and using principles of the treaty. Kia ora mai. So all I wanted to do in response to that, through the chair, was just to give an indication of where HBRC and local government are required to work. That said, we're not afraid to work, and also, as James has indicated, we're very keen to get into an open discussion that forms the type of relationship we need to get through ngā mea piki, me ngā he mea he. Can I just, in reference, tēnei tāku, kairaro te tuanui o tēnei whare mihi rā ki a koe rā e koro. E paora, e tikana te kōrero a anko. Me ki te pinia nei tāu nei manawa, kai runga e nā ngā kapua pauri, kai runga o koutou tō whānau, me ki rā poranga hau a ngā tikere. Nau nei te pātai e whakatakato i te rangi nei. Kia whai tētahi wā whakatā mū kia hoki mai ki te kāinga, kia mahi o koutou mai, kia manaki o koutou whānau. Tēnei mata. Kai reira tonu tēnā tono, kai runga e te papa. Anei rā mātou o tēnei whare e kia nei ko te kaunihira ārohe a te matau a Māui. E mihi kia koe. E mihi kia koe, me hoki koe ki tō kāinga. Ka tai wairua mai i konei. Ki runga i ngā komiti katoa ka heke, ka heke. Engari, nā tō whānau e karanga mai me hoki koe. Kai runga ki tēnā kia hore te marino, kai runga i tō ara. Kia tere te whakarohira, kai runga i a koe. Pēnei ai kia piata maira pēnei te paunamu, kai runga i o haere, ara haere. Ko tō ho haere, te kaha maira ki tō kāinga, ko te rangi Māori e ki tēnā, ki tēnā, ki tēnā o tātou. Anei rā tēnei whare e mihi kia koe. Kia whakawātia hoki mai ki te kāinga. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Just, I suppose, just got a point to add to Pere's kōrero, and then when we look at the structures and the framework, and then we look at the constructs going forward, and picking up from what Rick said earlier, because Māori are in a different, it's how we are going to work in the future as well. Obviously, you've got treaty settlement, and we know we've had these comments, you've got treaty settlement groups, you've got different ropu representing, you've got the different perimeters that the government are putting up. So, you know, we're struggling as well. And then I suppose for ourselves, we're all Taiwhenua reps, and the basis of our mandate come from our marae. And our marae were here long before all these other structures. And I think they'll surpass us going forward. But sometimes we struggle as well in the framework. You know, where do we sit? Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, like you're saying. Most probably it's got to be had at some point in time, and then how we sit into the new framework, I don't know, but obviously there'll be a conversation coming up in the future.
I think the key point is that we keep talking with one another, and that's going to come up as part of the charter and the terms of reference look.
Yeah, Mel, just have something to add to as well. No, thank you for that, Pere, and I guess part and parcel to our moimoia was to set your team up in here. in council, and we're very fortunate to have the presence of Māori within council. And I guess you kind of look at where the domino potential effect could be to advance some of these sorts of things. Some years ago, I think with some of your consents team, James, we tried to do the cultural kind of decolonisation kind of thing. And I think Ian Maxwell may have been Ian and some of his team too as well at Matahiwi Marae. But I think and I know the difficulty of just finding a planner, let alone having to kind of get in their heads, what the Māori worldview, without going too far into that space. But I think, and as a catalyst to kind of ensure that when it gets to the planning stage, you've got your full lights out, and what the sorts of implications that may well be before you start the old journey. And would suggest maybe as a potential enabler that a decolonisation process that could be undertaken, particularly with your planners or even inside some of the consents teams, would go down really well to kind of just understand that, wow, there's a cultural context just in case the old planner, they don't see the stuff. And it might be just a way by which, if we're talking about the next steps beyond putting our Māori team in here, because it was about cultural competency, and I guess cultural competency reflecting back into certain areas where key decisions are made. And just put that on the table just to say, I think it could well go down.
I think the rest of the follow-ups have been answered.
I just had a couple of points just in regards to the education. It was the next one on about management enhancement rivers. Was it about working with our rangatahi? And then obviously within our own Taiwhenua we've got rangatahi that we're developing, we're nurturing into leaders, and how we can build that with the council and some of our schemes. And I'll give an example. We take our rangatahi up to the bush. We're doing pest management, we've been doing planting projects similar to Wairoa, and then they're only 15, 16, 17-year-olds, but then we're trying to instill in them, hey, what do you leaders to come through in the process, so it'd be good to work with the council and say, hey, well, these rangatahi are potentially coming through into the future. I don't know if we can build that into some of the programming, and we've got a lot, but we've got some keen rangatahi, and I suppose that'll be right throughout our rohi. And if there's opportunity to build on that relationship, that would be great. And then item 7, minor items, is around that mana o te wai. Obviously that's a big kōrero that I think that's coming up as another discussion, so I won't need to speak on that. And just in regards to minor item number 8, and I mentioned in our report that going with our succession planning, how do we build that relationship with the regional council and put forward people that are passionate about that area. And I look at Kataraina and one of the mahi she does up in Wairoa, then how do we support her if we've got passionate people that want to lead some of that mahi for us in Ahuriri, and then we look at Kataraina as a role model to put some people into that mahi as well, Kataraina, because you do an awesome job. So let's just add to those points. So again, it's internal operational pere and saying how do we go through a process, so maybe we just catch up on those points. Kia ora.
And I believe, Katarina, you've how many people have you trained under the Māori compass?
About 70 plus.
Really? 70. So plenty for.
Main of them is through Awanuiarangi ne.
Kia ora. So that clay's going to be getting cold, and that lady over there's going to start getting angry with us if we don't hurry up. So if we can just move this, and then we'll put the minor items through, and then we've finished that.
Sorry, there was one I missed, and that was 9, and that's around the PGF funding. So obviously a lot of that funding is, and James mentioned about building Māori capacity and that within the organisation. So PGF is a big fund coming, and I think you might have quoted 360 million or something. So I suppose as a Māori committee, we need to be aware of that, and then how does that add value for ourselves within our region, and be a big part of that development as that program runs out. And then obviously with the KPIs and that attached, Māori are a key component of those application processes. So we've got to measure, we should be measuring how that's impacting within our Taiwhenua structures to improve outcomes for Māori and the environment.
Just on that one through the chair, perhaps a way of activating that might be to circulate James's presentation early, but we'll get Sarah Tully, who's the recovery manager, to also provide a narrative for that as well.
And I know in our economic meeting you brought up Matariki as a vehicle, and I know there's a thing, but I suppose as a committee we need to take some ownership for that, and we need to monitor ourselves to make sure that it's adding value for our Taiwhenua. No, because we can't rely on other committees to do that. We're here to do a job, and then we should take ownership.
Okay, so if I could get someone to move the follow-up items for the previous Māori committee meetings reports.
I will. Second.
Māori, seconded by Paul, all in favour? Okay. And just before we go for lunch, the Māori items, so the ones that we had in our pre-meeting, topic number 1 would be the Three Waters Review, there's Peter, Eden. Topic 2 is workshops wānanga, mainly around taumata arawai, te manawata wai, everything. That's Peter again, because Roger's left. Agenda and just the frequency, that just myself, just a quick mention. Topic 4, gravel extraction, that was Māori, the last 3 are Māori. Gravel extraction, waihi tapu, number 6, and annual long-term plan.
Yep.
And that was it?
Yep.
Okay. Annual long-term plan.
Just through the chair, can I add
Even.
3 very
Add
brief
3?
items
Yes.
to that,
So you can't hear.
please?
Please. We've already got 7.
Well, we should round it up to 10.
Bring our sleeping bag.
Too long, these meetings.
I promise to be quick.
Okay.
The first one is an introduction to Nathan Heath, who is, and I'll do that later. The second one is Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori and Kiwaha flags that you will see flying shortly. And the third one is around Te Kupenga, which is a cultural capability app that will be launched soon.
Nice.
Kia ora.
Well done. Okay, so now I don't have to move that, do I? So now we're going to go and break for lunch. Can we do half an hour?
Yes.
We can do half an hour. We'll be reconvene at 1:15. And if, Matua, if you could,
Kia ora, Uncle.
Painga uki tō mātou kai. Hei hoa whakapainga nei kai e oro mō te mātou tinana. Pāngai tia tō mātou wēru, taro o te ora. Koe anō ki te maunga he tō te pō mai. Hai nei, Hawke nei hai.
Aye. Kia ora.
Patua.